Alrighty, time for some slop. With my limited sample size and access to players, we've got a community tier list to go over. We managed to survey 178 participants through a live tier maker throughout the course of a week. While I don't have much in the way of audience data, my YouTube analytics points to this being a rather global survey with a good chunk of you being situated from the US. Anyhow, there wasn't a particularly strict criteria for this ranking. If anything, I went with you do you, so there may be some votes in weird places or funky outliers. In that regard though, from a quick glimpse, it looks like you've chosen mostly based on meta and enjoyability. Newer stuff gravitating towards the top, and older stuff naturally going towards the bottom. That being said, there's a few funny outliers and observations I'd like to make as we go through. Starting at the bottom, community sentiment is very united against a select few IDs. There isn't even a single ego in D ranks, since most of them can at least find a home somewhere. The bottom of the barrel is pretty much home to the worst of the worst. There is little to no redeeming factors to the stuff that's landed here. We're talking about the likes of Zwei South Sinclair, RB sous chef Gregor, Endcourt Musso, LCCB assistant manager Rodya, and Zwei South Rodya. None of these have particularly redeeming qualities in their kits, with the exception of Zwei South Sinclair and Endcourt Musso, both of which have extreme edge cases for their use over other IDs in backup. Zwei South provides some damage reduction, while rarely ever needed, can actually help mitigate some of the harder hits. As for Endcourt Musso, I've actually used this passive specifically for LC if forced, though you can likely do the same with Cockcliff, as both those IDs trigger self-burn for bonus effects, and are likely to start redlining their HP for their conditionals. Interestingly enough, LCCB Rodya may actually get some use riding the backfield in future though. With more and more bosses slotting defensive skills by default, it's possible that her use in the backfield could surge. Not that too many people are looking for the damage buff, but it is something of note regardless. As for Mola Sinclair, I honestly wish you guys ranked him higher, since he hands out a stupid amount of counts, but does little else. I reckon he's underrated here, but probably doesn't deserve much higher. Now, C tier is the home of passive slop, weaker egos, and plenty of Season 1 jank. All of the weaker LCB IDs are here, as well as a lot of O IDs. While a lot of stuff here isn't strictly unusable, it's not exactly the most favourable outside some archetypes and niche tech usage. There's actually quite a lot of older burn related IDs and egos here. Both 9.2s and most of the O lose, both lifetime stews and 2 out of 3 of the 4th match flames. You can really feel the age of some of the kit designs here, since they either need a lot to function, barely offer enough for consideration, or desperately needed that uptime 4 to let them function, like Kurokuma Rodya. Most of the stuff here becomes more usable with their team leaders and refreshers, but I'd specifically like to point out one terrible loss here. Talisman Sinclair. Previously, he was unrankable due to being so ridiculously broken that he carried an entire status on his back. If he was allowed to live, Rupture would be hands down the single most oppressive status in the entire game. Nothing would even come close, basically. But since he was taken out back in shots, he is pretty much just passive slop at this point, instead of having any real reason to bring him outside of that. Almost everything else here on the bench gives a percentage damage buff when conditionals are met. Means most of them are alright. Beal Otis, I reckon, deserves a little more stripes due to the newfound synergy with Alan Gregor, but I digress. She's useless when hitting the field. The only thing I can mention of note here is LCB Sinclair. For the more clinically insane, he doesn't look like an ID, but a friendly fire target instead. He's the perfect fuel for fell bullets, as well as having a solid passive to support it too. Regardless, this tier is pretty much passive slop to fill slots, and stuff you'd begrudgingly take if it helps you meet team synergies and conditionals. Now, B tier is where we get the misunderstood stuff. There's plenty here that requires some degree of effort to get going, but at least some form of payoff. IDs and egos here are things that we can actually factor into game plans and make use of more actively, rather than leaving to rot on the bench. While this is the clear delineation between the top half of the game's offerings and the bottom half, some of the stuff here can definitely outperform the higher ups if given the space, and allowed to fuck around and find out. All that to say, almost nothing here is in the territory of Coughing Baby, and is more than just usable. That said, here is the home of our lowest ranking WoW ego, that being Gregor's Garden of Thorns. There's been several hit pieces made on this thing, and while it's become more usable thanks to Kanto 8, it's still a lot to get all of its benefits. The main downside these days, I reckon, is the price in ego resources, since the damn thing is quite expensive to fuel in needing a bit of everything. There's one other WoW ego here, being Indicant's Trial. While this thing is rather strong, it does have limited uses in essentially needing a burn team or bust. In reducing wrath resistance though, this thing can amplify damage by a rather significant amount. It doesn't provide much else. Since resistances can't get lower than ×2 anyway, this doesn't help us out all too much on targets that are already weak to Wrath 2. If anything, this thing is a band-aid solution, and while useful for burn and Wrath-centric teams, the benefit is far less than ideal. Oh, it does do healing though. Decent bit too, for a rather affordable 7 Wrath and 3 Pride, at least within a burn team. On the flip side of things, this is where we can find our highest rated LCB sinner. It's Hongers. He rolls decent and has SP healing. Not bad at all. Heathcliff and Roshu are also up here too. Those two clash well and deal decent damage respectively. Anyhow, I'd like to point over to Potential Man. While I personally ranked him S rank due to being really fun to build around and use, perhaps I'm just a masochist. The top of the line here is Enforced. Suppose that does check out since there's significant restrictions on her usage. She gets the most value out of Lust Resin, and without it, she loses out on her main gimmick. That said, having access to Gaze can be quite strong, same with the case of Paralyze and Nails. What's a bit of a shame is the rest of the N-Corp fanatics not being the most useful to bring alongside. Anyhow, summing up B tier can be done simply by calling it Potential tier. A lot of the stuff here does indeed have some kind of long-term game plan, but since most players are rather impatient or would rather have quicker ramp or more self-sufficient ramp, a good chunk of these can't go all too much higher. That said, these guys can totally carry their weights in longer fights or otherwise enable more unique strategies. Now, A rank and above is the other 50% of the game. Everything here is solid in some way or another, having more upsides than downsides, or require little to no babying to get going. That, or their way of ramping up, doesn't require quite as much thought. This seems to be the highest that OO IDs are allowed to go in the rankings. None of them managed to land in the S tier this time around. The highest ended up being Meat Lantern Dawn. This makes sense due to enabling one of the strongest statuses through sheer amounts of rupture count. Although I reckon her use is less favourable these days with the sheer deluge of Heishos we now have. Speaking of which, almost every Heisho made it to A tier and above, with the exception of Yo Sinclair. He's probably the one with the worst ramp, considering he can't really burn himself outside of losing a clash. While he was a freebie unit, he's probably one of the worst Heishos we have received. Not to say he's unusable. Heck, I like using him alongside Heathcliff, but he's missing the source the rest of them have. All of the egos here have major upsides, whether that be insane damage like Fell Bullets, Poise generation in the Forcalgias, haste in Crow's Eye, and Body Sack, or even the ever-reliable Forest of the Flames and 4th Match Flame from Roshu. Long and short of this tier is, this is the stuff people like using when putting together a team. Finally, we arrive at S tier. These are almost undisputed in terms of how strong they are. While I can't speak for all of them, they all do multiple things exceedingly well. Some of them require teams to be built around them to function, but that's the thing. They're worth building those teams to get functioning. Manager Don, Lord Hongers, and Kurokuma Ishmael all provide ridiculous benefits to their respective teams. Don is an ace, taking the powers of her fellow Blood Fiends for enhanced skills, as well as sucking up all that Blood Feast to pay it out as damage. Ishmael turns otherwise unusable units into gold, and Hongers does both at the same time without breaking a sweat. While these can be claimed as rather greedy IDs in that respect, they can function on parts of a team rather than full teams as well. Heck, you can combine parts of Don and Ishmael's teams to get a ridiculous bleed team with insane payoffs. Unfortunately, bleed is continuously being battered by higher and higher coin counts, but that's besides the point and is a matter of encounter design instead. All of that, and we haven't even talked about egos. Everlasting tops this list. It's one of the single strongest egos in being able to enable Tremor and enhance it beyond what would seem reasonable. Getting Tremor Everlasting during a payoff turn is pure insanity, not to mention the sheer amount of count and potency this thing can provide. Couple that with the fact that you only need the Awakening a majority of the time, and this WoW ego makes an exceptionally strong case for the best of the best. Unbrilliant Glory ain't that far behind either. but as it's unobtainable, it's rather unfortunate that it's achieved such a high rating. Contempt, awe, and regret, though, are both reasons why their respective sinners are so carefully balanced around. The resources Roshu has access to, and the coin power that Mersault is allowed to have, are pretty much dictated by these egos. Mersault is doubly tied down here thanks to his base ego making it all the way this high. Chains of Others is a boss killer. If you need any boss whatsoever taken down, he is the solution. Heck, he uses it during a cutscene in Canto 6 to great effect. That's how you know how stupid powerful this thing is. Anyhow, does this tier list tell us anything we didn't already know? Honestly, not really. While there are some things I'd place differently compared to this tiny slice of the community, everything can pretty much be justified within one or two tiers of itself. There aren't any unexpected outliers or upsets really. Things that people have been screaming are powerful are indeed placed higher up, and things that are generally agreed to be weak are also cast down to the bottom. What was the purpose of this tier list anyway? Well, originally I stated it was you do you, right? That's the thing, you could have done any criteria you wanted. Whether you could take it on in a fight, whether they'd survive in the Aussie wilderness, heck, whether or not you'd fuck with the design or not. Yet a vast majority of people went ahead and decided that power and optimization was the ideal. Why is that? Well, given the opportunity, players will optimize the fun out of a game. That's a quote from Soren Johnson, a designer for Civilization. You can really feel that with this list at times, with stuff that requires more thorough planning dropping lower in favor of stuff that is set and forget, or particularly easy to build around and brief. See Lord Hongo. Plot enough haze shows to get him rolling. The manager Don. Plot the relevant amount of Blood Fiends or Blood Feast generation to allow her to function. Wild Hunt Heathcliff. Throw in a clashable counter every now and then to profit. And Kodya, Christ. Throw a single clashable defense and she can dumpster a vast majority of encounters through solving sinking alone. The point is, most of the things here are strong because you don't have to go out of your way to make them strong, else they come online significantly faster than everything else. They are self-sufficient or plain busted within their archetypes, and realistically speaking, the only way to make them more fun would be to throw stronger stuff at us. Yet, we didn't get that sort of challenge this season. There wasn't a railway, just a rerun. Nothing to really test our things against, save for MDE, and even that has its own problems in artificial difficulty and absurd challenges. Heck, MD15 has devolved down into solos being the way to go, as teamfights tend to be needlessly difficult as the numbers pile up and compositions can no longer keep up. What does it mean to optimize the fun out of a game? And can we even make optimizing fun in Limbus? Well, the first is a matter of consistency. When certain things sit at the top of power, for what reason should you make use of anything that's on the lower end of the scale? When you look at a tier list like this one, you'd imagine there would be 100% no reason to run Dishi Rodya over Kodya, yes? Heck, it's hard for me to even justify ever saying that because of the disparity in power. Sure, you get blunt damage instead of pierce and have access to egos, but Kodya just does so much by herself, right? Making use of a weaker unit cannot possibly be fun, let alone be brought up in conversation without the X is better than Y argument coming up. But that's the thing, since we've already internally shelved her, we can't even begin to fathom her usage. We've already optimized her out, since she'll perform worse at practically everything and require more effort. Now imagine for a moment we instead decide to cut everything from S tier and everything from C tier and below. If we were to make a list out of just this middle section of the game, the gate between mediocrity and greatness, I reckon we could have more interesting conversations rather than glazing the top and spiting the bottom. But the knowledge of what's above sabotages most discussions of team building. Why use X when Y exists is the most common argument made in regards to power. Answering with the word fun is asking for a response along the lines of, but it's inefficient. In Limbus specifically, this is particularly hard to argue about. As a turn-based game with only so many options per turn in player agency, the level of knowledge matters more than a player's execution. And since we're in an age of perfect information, you can very easily just look up how to play something to the meta and immediately put it into use. You don't have to practice, you don't have to learn, integrate and automate. You can just follow a step-by-step guide 9 times out of 10. And that's what's so limiting about this game's design space. As we get more and more overloaded kits, space for mistakes and execution get further and further shrunk. It's hard to play the stronger IDs wrong even if you win rate them. All of them function even without playing to their gimmicks. While they're significantly more powerful when played towards their gimmicks, they aren't slouches if you play poorly. Compare this to something like Sunshower Heathcliff, where you have to plan out every single turn meticulously, and it's night and day in how players would approach each. But okay, what if you're not here necessarily to have fun, but just want to clear your dailies and get on with it. Well, I ask you why you're even playing anymore to begin with. What's keeping you here then? If it's the narrative, you can watch someone else play. Or heck, watch someone's commentary-free playthrough. Why put yourself through the grind and the effort at that point? It's a gacha game to boot. These things are designed to waste your time, right? I wish I could say Limbus is different, but Luxcavation and Mirror Dungeons exist. They're a form of rather shoddy vertical progression. Luxcavation especially aren't fun to do, and are indeed gacha slop. There's no peak here, it's the same bloody encounters every week. There's no weekly challenge or puzzle to design around. Once you've nailed a team to handle it for the season, it's pretty much done. Red Luxcavation could be more interesting, but it isn't. We're getting a new one next season, perhaps that'll be the one that does it. But Luxcavation and MD are fuss places where the most optimization even happens, rather than the main story content. Here, it's mostly cutting down clear times and turn counts, as what matters is clearing faster rather than clearing at all. Luxcavations, for the most part, are a formality. You can even skip them if you wish for an added cost. As for MD, floors 1 to 5 are pretty much impossible to fail. At that point, you'd want a skip button for those too. Otherwise, you're there hitting buttons for 20 to 60 minutes depending on the team, and you're gift RNG. But okay, let me take a few steps back and not just swing at the breeze and preach to the choir. Give a proper look at the other ways this whole affair can be approached. When can optimizing be fun? What if optimizing is the fun in the game? How do we design for that? Well, that's not simple to answer and is a case-by-case basis. If we look at Path of Exile, the answer is to make the entire game about optimization. You are in an almost endless feeling pursuits of power, kill elder gods, and wipe increasingly juiced up maps. There's always some way to increase your DPS or defenses, or to automate parts of your setup. The progression is virtually endless. Then it all resets at the end of the league. You can do it all over again and it's bloody addicting. Can we take this approach with Limbus? No we can't. What about meta progression? MD is a roguelike mode, right? What if we wanted to do roguelite instead? What if we wanted upgrades to be more persistent rather than Starlight going towards per run bases? Here's the thing, we've done that. Season 4's MD was exactly that, and it pissed off quite a lot of players, since otherwise burning Starlight for bonuses had a cap. We've since replaced that since grinding out Starlight at the start of a season wasn't considered fun. What about creative restrictions? If team building is the issue where there are must-haves and obvious optimizations, what if we ban those? Well, we've already got a light ban on sinners that were used previous MD, in the form of losing out on Starlight bonuses. In restricting the Starlight gain though, all we've done is create a longer rotation, in where while we use a larger variety of stuff, we are still cycling between up to 6 teams for Starlight bonuses on a lock-based system. This is brilliant for long-term players that have more stuff, but is rather depressing for newer players that are missing out on things. So if the main solutions can't be used, what can we do then? Well, I mentioned weekly challenges at some point now. Rather than generically designing a system to last the entire season, what if there were more unique week-by-week challenges? Other gachas usually do this through weekly raids with modifiers. Why can't Limbus do the same? Well, if the team were willing to put out a weekly encounter of some kind, we could get a wider variety of ways to employ IDs and egos, as well as find space for lesser used things that could open up design space. This could be as simple as the boss having an immunity to specific statuses or shuffled resistances. Heck, there's a pretty fun solution that I can propose if we wanted to combine both Luxcavation and Mirror Dungeons into one without making things 100% routine. Hear me out. What if we got a single floor to clear weekly that was a remix of nodes from Acanto or Intervalo? Essentially, what if we got a single MD theme pack for the week to design a team around? Casual players could clear it once or twice for the weekly rewards, where players who wanted a bit more meat to chew on could clear it multiple times for dailies or further boosted rewards. It doesn't have to replace the Luxcavations, but it could be similar in length to doing all of them manually instead. The rewards offered would be greater, but you wouldn't be able to sweep them, since they would be inherently harder due to not getting MD gifts outside of the ones offered in the pack. You'd be encouraged to tailor your team composition towards the stuff offered there. Now you essentially have a miniature MD that takes maybe 10 to 15 minutes tops, that provides the rewards of doing Luxcavations as well as MD. I'd say that's quite a solid compromise. Now if you only wanted one or the other in terms of rewards, you could of course just do those. But if we offer only one pack, wouldn't newbies be gatekept from not having the required IDs to streamline these packs? We can offer 2 solutions to that. First would be to do rentals. This allows players to get a taste for the newer stuff while building up their accounts. Fortunately, we can't make the rental too strong, otherwise that defeats the purpose of having any progression as it is. What can we do then? Well, what if we offer a suboptimal rental alongside pack selection? Now players who don't have the resources can take out predetermined teams to use with the packs on offer. Those who have the teams could also pick and choose the challenge they'd like to take on. Give rewards for clearing different packs even, so that players would have a reason to do all the ones on offer. Heck, if we really wanted, we could remove MD and replace it with this weekly pack system, but provision 5 packs that need clearing. You don't have to do a full MD to cash in, and instead get as much as you're willing to put in. This would be closer to Arknight's Annihilation missions, wherein you can functionally pick and choose which nodes you want to clear for the rolling currency rather than always having to do the same ones. Okay, but what about the kinds of players that want that consistency? The ones that want things offered to remain the same? Here's how we can make use of Starlight then. We can make the packs provided for the week not fixed, but are instead able to be tailored. You could use the Starlight search function if you wanted to pick a specific pack, spending Starlight from clearing other packs to select one of your choice. Otherwise, there could be some kind of penalty for choosing a pack that isn't the week's rotation. Less Starlight or rewards, etc. This encourages players to play the week's packs, but also allows them to grind out the faster ones if they don't have the time. Make it less painful to do the ones that aren't the weekly selection. We could do 2 separate levels of Starlight rewards. Weekly packs give a bonus, and IDs that haven't been used that week give a Starlight bonus. Plus, if you decide to use IDs that haven't been used that week at least, you'll get something out of running packs of your choice rather than the weekly ones. If you decide to do both a weekly pack and use Sinners that hadn't been used, you are functionally getting double bonuses. But if you decide to do neither, you'd just be burning away Starlights to select a pack or going neutral if we make the search function free. Regardless, allowing for this level of customization isn't impossible. We're not really introducing new systems here, but rather granting players the freedom of choice when engaging with the game. This is probably as close as I can reason to the best of both worlds. Now if we want to go even further, let's steal something from Path of Exile's endgame: map modifiers. In this case, they'd be pack modifiers. We could allow players to take on additional adversities in order to reap more rewards. In this case, it'd just be remixing the MD 11 to 15 system into the lower floors. Now players with more developed accounts and strategies can figure ways to play around those for greater rewards after clearing. With that in mind, what if we were to adjust the rewards structure as well? Rather than a fixed number of threads, tickets, and boxes per pack clear, what if we added a currency shop as well? Now you get baseline rewards, weekly/daily clear bonuses, and finally a customizable reward structure. All of this without having to add anything new to the game. By moving around systems in place, we do have a way of satisfying almost all kinds of players. The newbies get rentals to clear the contents, the more experienced ones can tailor towards their strengths, and finally the hardcore grinders can aim to empty out the shop every week and max out the adversities. All of these are systems we already have in place but aren't incentivized to do them as well as we should. Plus, in playing to the game's strengths, we could propose a system that should satisfy a good chunk of the player base in one go, while expanding the range of interaction they have with the systems on offer. So in summary, keep the previous systems for those that would rather engage with those, but give them a new way of handling their daily and weekly grind if they wish to do so. Take a handful of packs from MD and offer them to the players to clear for the week. These would reward Starlight for clearing them, and Starlight for using IDs that haven't been used this week for the clear. Starlight can be spent to do packs not on the week's rotation, or spent for various other bonuses, whether those be the Starlight bonuses we currently have, or MD gift search to make the harder packs easier. In addition, add customizable adversities for each pack, which increase the amount of currency rewarded for clearing packs. Finally, include a shop to spend the currency for rewards of choice per week. Add enough rewards that a casual player can get a nice amount for light effort, and a more hardcore player to get plenty out of for engaging with the game. In turn, this will give players the kinds of fun received from challenge and puzzle solving. We wouldn't be aiming to increase execution requirements, but instead play on the knowledge base that players already have access to. Is this system perhaps too generous for a gacha game? Well yeah, perhaps you're right. When Limbus is running events, it's pretty close to the same anyway. With the amount of egos and IDs in this game, I reckon we're due for this kind of injection anyhow. Regardless though, this is likely too much effort for them to put forward despite just being a remix of current content. What was I talking about again? Oh, right, optimizing the fun out of a game. Well, honestly, we're at a point where optimizing has a pretty hard ceiling in this game anyhow. You can't really reduce an encounter to a single turn outside of MD at this point, so there's still room to go beyond, regardless. I just wish we had some method of avoiding vertical progression, but due to the way the gacha works, we're unfortunately pigeoned in the power creep. Thanks for listening to some very inane rambling. Rather, I considered scrapping the middle section of this video just because of how insane I started sounding, but regardless, next video will be the last one for the year. It'll be going over all the mistakes I've made in the last 2 months since starting, with a progressive punishment system based on how severe the mistakes are. That should be up before the end of the year anyhow.